So when you're brewing a cup of coffee, essentially what you're doing is extracting four different soluble components off of the coffee ground. The ground itself is made of cellulose, which is not dissolvable in water, but on the outside of it, it's coated with these four substances. They are lipids, acids, sugars, and alkaloids. Now, they all behave very differently, and the way you brew your coffee, how long it takes you, and how you grind it will determine the in cup quality. So the way I like to look at these four compounds is like runners. Lipids, they're like sprinters. So they start the race and end really quickly. These are your oils, your coffee oils. So as soon as you start brewing, those oils pretty much come right out of the coffee. Next, going to be your acids. These are what give you your fruity flavors. These are what gives coffee its sharpness. They also start at the beginning, and they're kind of like relay runners because they run and run and run and run and run. And at a certain point, they encounter the sugars. Now, the sugars don't start the race, but in the middle, they start to run alongside the acids. And at some point, the acids will take that baton, so to speak, and pass it on to the sugars. And the sugars continue to run up to a certain point. Lastly, you have your alkaloids right here. And these are the marathon runners. So they will run as long as that coffee is in contact with water. They run uh, until the coffee is bitter, pretty much. And these are the things that make coffee bitter. Alkaloids, the most popular or most well known alkaloid is caffeine. So essentially, uh, we have a couple different terminologies for evaluating coffee, and they are under extracted, over extracted, and ideal range. So the ideal range is between 18 and 22% extraction. So that means that when you add water to that coffee, the water is stripping the coffee ground of those solids, and they have mass. And based on the actual weight that it takes away from it, between 18 and 22% will give you an ideal range of extraction. And what that means is essentially you've achieved all the lipids because they've come out, you've gotten all of the acids, and now you are developing sugars. Now, sugars do still come out after the 22% mark. The thing is that because these alkaloids are coming out the entire time, as long as that water is in contact with the coffee, they are adding bitterness to the coffee. So, what you want to do is get the most sugar out of the coffee with the least amount of alkaloids to the point that they take away that sweetness. So, if you keep brewing, you will add more sweetness, but you will also add more alkaloids. And because your tongue can perceive alkaloids in a lower dosage, so basically, if you had an equal weight of sugar and alkaloids, you would really notice the alkaloids over the sugar, they predominate. You have to figure out how quickly you're going to stop your extraction before the alkaloids start to make your coffee over extracted, which will make it bitter. For most coffees, this falls around 22%. In my experience, I've seen 20% be kind of where it stops for other technical reasons, typically because grinders don't grind consistently enough to allow you to reach these 22 percentages. But now there are some grinders out there that are allowing you to go into 23, maybe even higher percentages. But when I dial in a coffee, when I figure out how to make the coffee taste as good as I possibly can, what I essentially do is I work backwards. So I make a bitter cup of coffee, and then I slowly, over time, start to remove some of that extraction from it. Basically, I either coarsen it or I add more coffee. I like to coarsen it until my extraction becomes lower and lower. So it goes from bitter to less bitter to less bitter to sweet. That first sweet cup is going to be the most theoretical sugars that you can have in that coffee with minimal bitterness. It will vary depending on the grinder you use and the coffee you use, but that is one really reliable way to get the most sugar out of your coffee because the sugars are really what allow you to have an enjoyable cup of coffee. If it's under extracted, you'll notice that every under extracted coffee is really sour, and that's because you have all these acids, but you haven't developed enough sugars to balance them out. So that's all I got for this. If you have any questions, please leave me a comment below. And thanks for listening.